Hello and welcome to another episode of The Defenders on Sansad TV. And in this episode, we're looking at a subject which is increasingly catching the attention of both military and civilian aviation experts, as well as the military in the Indian context, which is now very keen to absorb this equipment extensively for tactical and strategic purposes. And we are going to be talking about the use of drones in largely a military context. And to that extent, we have with us Lieutenant General PJS Pannu, who, apart from his distinguished military career, in his post-retirement role, has now worn the hat of somebody who is being sought after to give his opinion on the applications of drones in the case of the military. More recently, he was a lead speaker at the Aero India event in Bengaluru. And we have with us Dr. R.K. Narang, who is a drone, aviation and related areas policy expert. And Dr. Narang joins us on a Zoom link. So I will first go to Dr. Narang and ask him to enlighten us on the policy issues, particularly with reference to drones in the Indian context, because as I understand that there was a reluctance to loosen the strings around the drones policy until about a year ago, after which the government has given a go-ahead for the drones to be implemented and to be used extensively for a variety of purposes. But how does the policy play in the area of drones, Dr. Narang, particularly when there is so much activity already happening in the airspaces around our large metropolitan cities and the capital in particular? Where do you think the controls would come in to ensure there is no confusion and an alarm that should not have been set off could be set off because the drones suddenly appear on the radar screen of so many organizations that monitor the airspace?
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Drone sector is a very, very promising sector for India. And now this aspect has become more visible when last year Prime Minister handed over indigenously designed, developed, manufactured ISR and logistic drone to the Indian Army. In addition, Indian companies were able to develop, supply swarm drones to Indian Army. Now, these are niche areas where Indian private sector has come forward and supplied these technologies to India. Now, coming to the policy aspect, 2014 was the first time that drone operation was banned in India, after they realized that Indian companies are developing drones and using it for various activities in India. Thereafter, 2018 came the first drone regulation, draft regulation 2021. They formalized on 12th April 2021. They came up with the US rules. Now, these rules are very, very restrictive. Compared to the global aviation, drone aviation development, they could have been, death in a bed of Indian aviation. So Indian government stepped in again, reviewed these drone rules, and this is the only rule which has been reviewed and repassed. Other than the Kisan bill, this has been reviewed and passed by the government within 4 months of issuing the first rules. The US rules were issued in April 2021. And 25th August, government came up with the new drone rules, which are very, very enabling. And after 25th April 2021, government has taken several policy initiatives to stimulate the Indian drone manufacturing and services industry. And these include productivity-linked incentive scheme, banning the import of small drones, and also initiatives like they have divided the airspace in 3 parts. Now, opening up the airspace was a challenge. There were apprehensions as you raised the issue.
Right.
So the entire Indian airspace was divided into red, green, and red, yellow, and green segments. And remember, green segment is the largest segment, so which indicates where drone can operate with given conditions unrestricted below 400 feet. Now, this is a major change in the thinking and the policy initiatives by the government of India. So,
Right.
policy-wise, government has taken several initiatives. This was followed by February 2022 when government came up with the Kisan drone scheme. And Prime Minister came up with a slogan that I want every Indian to have a mobile in one hand and drone in his field. So I think it's an impetus given by the government which has to be leveraged. Now, this policy initiative needs to be supported by the technology initiative, and some of the issues as we move forward, we'll realize there is much more needs to be done. Government of India also set up a target of making India a global drone hub by 2030. Now, it's a very aspirational program. Now, can we do it? These are the issues we need to deliberate on. And I would also like to relate it to the Prime Minister's impetus on Atmanirbharta. He also recently said we must add Jai Anusandhan to Jai Jawan, Jai Kisan, and Jai Vigyan. That means we have to have a research-led industry in India. And of course, we have an Amrit Kal to make India advanced nation by 100 years of independence. That is 2040.
Well, very, very comprehensively brought out by you, Dr. Narang. Thank you so much. Even I have more clarity now about how the drone-related airspace is going to be used. But I'll go now to General Pannu. Now, General Pannu, since you are speaking on advising various bodies on the military applications of drones, there's something I came across, and that was basically drones could fly at various ranges and heights, no doubt. But there is the issue about the usage of drones in a dull, dirty, or dangerous mission. And can you explain those, and also how they can become tactically more and more useful to begin with, and eventually when we have more capability, we'll go to the strategic space?
Thank you, Maroof. You actually touched upon the 3Ds, the dull, dirty, and dangerous missions. Really speaking, when you talk about military applications, they touch all these 3Ds. Because in the beginning, when there is no war, no peace, or there is absolute peace, the intelligence gathering itself is a very dull job, because you have to constantly keep looking at the various activities across the border in areas suspected or unsuspected to find out if there is any threat emanating. Right. And then you start tracking, and then you start doing reconnaissance of certain specific areas. You create intelligence out of it, and at some point, you create an information for making the intelligence preparation of a battlefield. That is where now the dirty and the dangerous part starts, because the Air Force per se has a pilot in it. And the pilot versus pilot, the war psychosis is very different. But now the moment you take out the human being out of it, now you are not risk averse. You can fight the way you want, because there are no body bags coming home. It is only the technology versus technology. But what is important here is that when you take out the human being from a machine, it becomes autonomous. Autonomous machine would mean that you have links which have to be secure, and they have to be loyal to you. The moment autonomous system can get hacked or somebody else can start controlling it, you completely lose that control. So the security of flying an autonomous body in the battlefield or otherwise is extremely dangerous. And that is where the indigenous system and Atmanirbharta comes in. And fortunately, we have many companies, many startups going into the defense. In fact, about 800 defense companies which participated in the recent Aero India show. But the point is that when you start looking at the indigenous content in it, that is what the Atmanirbharta means. That is a little bit of a moot point, that most of the niche technologies are imported technologies, either through transfer of technology or direct import of assemblies and sub-assemblies and components. That is the risky part. And I think that is what the drone ecosystem needs to work on, so that we have our own systems, so that the dull, dirty, and dangerous is all working towards our own security mechanism in the national security architecture during no war, no peace, or during hot war, so that we can dominate the entire warfare scenario through application of a drone force. Now, drones are not going to be a force multiplier or a secondary application. They are going to be the primary force projection devices. So therefore, to have a drone core, to have a drone supply system, to have a drone manufacturing, all have to come together in an ecosystem. And that, I think, that is what we need to understand and work towards.
Okay, so you talked about a lot of things and you repeatedly brought out the issue to need to indigenize more. And, at the recent Aero India event, one of the indigenized products that was displayed with a lot of pride and did bring home a lot of its capabilities because of its ability to photograph and look and report on an event was the indigenously developed TAPAS system. Now, the TAPAS system, perhaps a lot more than all of us do, that it is able to hover for about 18 hours plus minus at heights ranging from 12 to 19,000 feet and is able to give very good clarity of the pictures it brings up. Now, how is it that this is going to replace the earlier similar systems that we had been importing? What is the big difference it's going to create in the tactical scenario or even the strategic scenario as more of those gets absorbed by the army?
Yes, Maroof, TAPAS by the DRDO, which actually stands for Tactical Airborne Platform for Aerial Surveillance, which has the capability of ILINT, COMMENT, and IFF and all that into it, and taking high resolution pictures from 12 to beyond 20,000 feet. In fact, it's not climbed up to 30,000 yet, which is desirable. The indigenous R&D would have certainly gone into it because it is a DRDO manufacturer, and they're also looking at Archer, which will be the combatized version of it, which is actually not been tested and is being spoken about because it's still under the development phase. Having said that, we are still at the moment looking at very easy platforms which are only flying platforms. Actually, drone is nothing. It is an aerial platform. But as you start putting the payload onto it, payloads can be demonstrated for communication, for ISR. But at the end of it today, the complication in the systems and assemblies and sub-assemblies are largely imported or technology which comes from outside. These things will best get tested in a battlefield because it is technology versus technology. A single technology demonstrator, whereas you're not in a contested space, is something which you can talk about, but I suppose once it is in a contested space, then the autonomous capability of having the complete mastery and control and then ownership of it is extremely important. So TAPAS was certainly a showstopper, displaying the indigenous capability of the DRDO, which is really commendable. I think it is only one category of drone, but when you start talking about nano, micro, mini, hail, mail, and then near space systems, and when you start looking at how a flying robo system, which is also amphibious in nature, because it is not only something which has to constantly fly, smaller ones can come and sit very close to your adversary, start looking at you and continue to report and fly back at night. They can be used in various modes, and you can't even make out whether it was a drone or something else. You can even have actually a drone which is in the underwater domain. You can even have sensors which are subterranean. So at the end of it, every application from sub-tactical to strategic can be used by application of drones. I think it's a very vast subject. I think we are going through a drone shock, and in the warfare, you will find that if you don't have the competence and the capability in drones, it's like saying the victorious warriors win first and then go to war, whereas the warriors who lose, they start fighting first and then they try to figure out how to win. But those who can master the drones, I think, will be the victorious warriors who would win before the war.
Okay, so I'll stay within the battlefield scenario with you. Since you've commanded a corps in Ladakh, the the hot core now, which is facing the Chinese after the intrusions, 14 core, and the Chinese had been using drones much before we got into the act, if I may say so, and they have moved large number of troops onto the front line, using drones to acquire information, using drones to guide them onto which are the gaps, as it were, which they could perhaps consider exploiting. And this has become a very important now counter response on our side, the use of drones to basically now tell the Chinese that we can also see where you are going to likely to make movements towards or not. But what also needs to be understood is the fact that the drones, you talked about payload capabilities. And in a simple term, the drone not only does reconnaissance, but it can lift anything from 5 to 40 kgs of payload over a distance of 5 to 20 kilometers. So logistics in the mountains again is a problem, because in the time a drone can travel with a certain payload over a distance, say in about half an hour to 1 hour, a mule column will take 5 to 8 hours to cover that distance. Can you explain that further?
Yes, Maroof, as we were talking about, that there are far too many use cases drones can be put to. In fact, in every stages of war, every stage of war, in every ops of war, the drones can be used, right from an infantry battalion for special operations, for building up by supplying ammunition, logistics, reconnaissance, and also help out construction, sending construction material to places, even actually winching certain material, tying the ropes for a cliff assault right on top, crevasse crossing, pulling out the avalanche victims. There are far too many things that a drone can do for lifting the weight up. But the problem is in mountains, the high wind conditions, the low temperature, and the rarity. That complicates the whole thing, while what can be demonstrated and is claimed to be achieved by certain drone companies when they go to Ladakh area, you find that in low temperatures, the batteries fail, which largely are imported. The wind conditions are such that the wind shear itself topples the drone balance. Also, the low temperatures, you find that certain materials which are used go brittle. So therefore, you have to use flexible propellers. So the same drone cannot be used in Rajasthan, which is plus 50 degrees. So plus 50 to minus 50 degrees is the whole tolerance in materials, which is extremely important. The Chinese have really mastered it. One of the largest companies, or many companies which are working for drones, have become very large. You would have heard of the DJI company, which has been supplying drones not only to Chinese military, but also all over the world. The DJI company also were the first ones to create an anti-drone radar. So the DJI was supplying both. So over a period of time, the Chinese companies have started investing in every assembly, sub-assembly, and component which are being routed through various companies, and they find places in various military applications also, which is dangerous. So therefore, Chinese have gone in for whole range of the defense application of drones and also counter-drone systems. I think unless a country understands the counter-drone system, we will not be able to withstand the drone involvement in the military. So I think...
Okay. Now, before I just move to Dr. Narang, you brought this point up. I was going to save it for the end. But let me ask you on this, that I believe the DRDO has come up with the D4 drone system, which is meant to be an anti-drone system, the first indigenously developed system. Obviously, it's in its nascent stages. But how effective can it be to service our requirement at this point of time?
See, you're talking about the counter-drone radar of the DRDO. Actually, this was unveiled during the Aero India 2023. As far as the counter-drone is concerned, radar is only one part of the whole thing, because, you have to go for the RF, you have to go for the acoustics, you have to make sure that there are multiple ways that you actually detect, identify, and kill a drone. So I think a counter-drone radar, time will tell how many radars and at what range this radar will be able to not only identify, detect, and also use for directing the anti-drone kill system against it. I think time will tell, but I think it's a very big achievement that it is indigenous system, and we don't have to depend on imported, ultimately the DJI, systems which have actually found a place all over the world, which is, I think, a very big achievement.
Okay, so kudos to DRDO and our scientists. And Dr. Narang, now coming back to you as a man who looks at policy issues, I'm told that the national drone policy would require to be constantly tweaked, and it would require a certain degree of evolution so that we are able to have a national drone policy which is, in a way, keeping to national and international standards. At the same time, it will require setting out guidelines both for the indigenous platforms, externally imported platforms, the limits drones can be used, and the type of sensors that can be applied by those companies that are going to look at having drone systems as a mainstay of some of their transportation activities, some of their activities to pick up information, for example, in the agricultural sector. So can you give us a little more clarity on the national drone policy, how it will be implemented in the civilian sector, where it puts limits on the military usages of drones?
Drone policy per se is a very progressive policy, but the challenge lies in deciphering what is given in the policy and implementing it on field. Now, there are, as regards to drone development and manufacturing in India is concerned, the policy, even certification to some extent, those aspects have been covered. Standards is an evolving field, but when we talk of export of drones, there are gray areas. Which drones can be exported? Now, Indian drone industry is becoming competitive. They need clarity on some of the issues in the drone policy. The timelines they need very, online approval mechanisms, the timelines, and what all can be exported without needing the government permissions. Let's say it's a commercial drone. Now, for every export, these Indian companies face challenges. So I think there is a little bit of segregation required on the policy front to ensure that Indian companies which are trying to establish themselves in the global arena, their problems are looked into and their issues are addressed. The policy also has to take into account that indigenous manufacturers, those companies who are designing indigenous components, indigenous drones, are given preference in the procurement. The RFPs have to ensure that IDDM components are included in the RFP QRs so that indigenous components are given. That will also ensure that Indian companies are forced to innovate and develop indigenous components. As of now, as brought out by General Pannu, that some of the critical components we have dependencies on foreign OEMs. In addition to that, I think we also need to ensure that R&D funding earmarked for the private sector, the SOP needs to be finalized. If that part is not done, currently that same funding is being used for less important programs like TDF and IDEX and being shown, whereas that funding was meant to undertake strategic projects with the private sector. So I think that SOP has to bring clarity how private R&D is to be used. In addition, the ecosystem is required which promotes innovation in India. Unless we address these challenges, Indian industry will have a challenge in scaling up the production. As regards to a counter-drone system, which you just mentioned, DRDO has transferred technology to the 5 companies, but more advanced technologies, the R&D is, more R&D is needed to address some of the technologies gaps. And we have seen in the Ukraine war how drones can create havoc in some segments of the warfare. So new technologies and new innovations have to be countered with a better counter drone system. So Indian private sector, the IDEX has played major role in providing India with the drone and counter drone systems. Some of the companies, they have been able to successfully demonstrate the counter drone capabilities, and DRDO has gone into the domain of radar detection and the laser neutralization in addition to RF jamming. So they have provided a basic platform which needs to be further developed to meet the future challenges.
Okay. So
Maroof,
that's, you again have covered a number of areas which require national level attention, and I'm encouraged to note the amount of push the government is willing to give to this new sector, where we have to carry out a quick catch-up game. General Pannu, last question to you. The strategic dimensions of drones. Now, they can be game changers in battles, as we've seen in the conflict between Azerbaijan and Armenia, and more recently how Ukraine was also using drones to play havoc to advancing Russian mechanized and tank columns. In our context, the usage of drones on the China battlefront you've talked about. Where is it that drones can be used for even surveillance, which gives us the level of alertness that we require? Because the BSF has been receiving information and countering so many drops that take place from the Punjab border side from Pakistan and also on the LOC. And these are also of not just military systems, not weapons, but also of drugs. So, and drugs, as you know, is a global problem. So, is there a strategic dimension that the drone production in the country is also being geared up to meet, or we are first focusing on the military and national security dimension and we'll take care of that later?
I think drone has become a weapon of choice or element of choice in the proxy war. Largely, before the Russian-Ukraine conflict, there was a belief system that we will not see conventional wars of that scale, which has happened now. But the proxy war dimension has not changed. So it is proxy war plus conventional and going down to proxy. So the state and the non-state actors have also merged, because the state only supports the non-state actors and large amount of deniability comes through it. Drones being autonomous can also contribute huge amount of deniability. So the drug peddling, supplying of arms and ammunition, all that is happening across not only India-Pakistan context, but all over. Iran has started manufacturing drones of the kind which can do anything. You can call it nefarious. You can even look at strategic implication of using it for assassination. And then kamikaze drones, all that can. So the combatized use of drones from proxy war, from no war, no peace, for minor tactical operations to strategic applications, of course, is being done across the board. But what is important here is the drones being very small, slow moving, they can also become static, and their flight path cannot be predicted, becomes a huge challenge in the air defense environment.
Okay, so there are lots of areas of concern, and I think we're just getting into it now. But quite clearly, I remember a remark by the former Army Chief General Naravne, in which he said that drones is going to be as important for future wars as tanks were in the last century. More of that as we go along, but I wish to thank Dr. Narang for his brilliant insights and to General Pannu for clarifying to us so many areas where there is still a bit of a fog about where we are going. And thanks to all of you for watching. Until our next episode, goodbye.